Welcome to this Euractiv event on fighting illicit trade in Europe. How can we best address the problem? Our program today is supported by Philip Morris International. I'm Brian Maguire. If you're joining us today online and in the studio as well, you can follow on Twitter and social media with hashtag EA Debates, and on Slido, you can see it on the screen there as well, hashtag illicit trade. We'll be bringing questions throughout the discussion, not just at the end, so please get active on that. Our team will send me the questions and we'll put those to our panel. We also have the studio audience with us here today. Illicit trade is a growing concern in Europe, and over the past few years, investigators have seen an increase in factories making illicit products here in the European Union. Previously, most of the illicit products consumed within Europe originated outside the single market. COVID and Russia's invasion of Ukraine changed that. With tobacco, for example, in 2022 alone, international operations involving OLAF, the European Anti-Fraud Office, led to the seizure of 531 million illicit cigarettes, more than 205 tons of raw tobacco, and 65 tons of water pipe tobacco. The majority of these cigarette seizures were made from illicit production sites within the EU. A report by KPMG estimates that while total cigarette consumption is declining in the EU, some of that reduction is being offset by an increase in illicit cigarette consumption in the region. One explanation may be high excise tax increases across the EU. Now, joining us today to discuss this, we have a great panel with us. And we have Juan Carlos Buitrago Arias. He's the Brigadier General retired from the Colombian National Police and CEO and founder of Strategos BIP. Great to have you with us. We also have Tatiana Koschuk. She's an expert in tax issues from Groford Institute. And joining us online as well, we have Łukasz Kozłowski. He's the Chief Economist of the Federation of Polish Entrepreneurs. Great to have you with us. And also here in the studio, we have Nicola Otte. He's the Global Head of Illicit Trade Prevention at PMI. Thank you for joining us today, Nicola, also. So, but first, we also had another speaker who wasn't able to make it, but I spoke with him a little earlier. It's Luigi Scordamaglia. He's the Managing Director of Filiera Italia and International Director of Coldiretti. We have about a 6-minute video to show you now. If you want to see the full version of that, there'll be a link available as well online. The social media team will post that for you. So let's hear from Luigi.
Fighting illicit trade in Europe, how can we best address the problem? That's what we're talking about today. Joining me is Luigi Scordamaglia. He's the Managing Director of Filiera Italia and International Director of Coldiretti. Luigi, thanks so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Look, we have a lot to talk about, but I want to just get a state of play synopsis of the current situation in counterfeiting and illicit trade of made in Italy products in the agri sector. Where are we with this? Is there a shift in how made in Italy is perceiving this counterfeit and illicit trade?
But if we speak about food, agri-food products, we must make a clear distinction between two different phenomena. The first is counterfeiting and illicit trade, and the other is Italian sounding. Counterfeiting is clearly illegal, is penalized under the criminal law because it entails a health risk for consumer, a fraudulent behavior for the genuine product. So it's very serious, but it's very small phenomena. It's present at a very, very minimal manner.
Okay, but practically, how do you secure these value chains? Things like product tracking. Are there technological solutions or are there regulatory solutions? How do you enforce the agreements and ensure this multi-generational success?
Yeah, first of all, you need a long-term contract because you need to have a very transparent system of pricing. So you can be sure as a primary producer of farmers that you can cover your production cost. And then you need also technical solutions that improve the safety of the product, the sustainability of the products. I think one of the first probably a long-term agreement of this kind of agreement was just established in early 2000s, especially in the tobacco fields. Thanks to the cooperation among Coldiretti, as I said, the farmers' organization that represented at that time more than, now it's more, but more than 20,000 tobacco farmers, Italian farmers. Together with Philip Morris Italia, the Minister of Agriculture, we secured this long-term investment in the tobacco cultivation.
You know, the illicit trade has a very mixed picture across Europe in the tobacco sector. What's the strategy behind Italy's success? You know, what role has law enforcement played? What have legal frameworks helped with? You know, what are the effective tools that have made this an increasing success?
But first of all, the picture today, the situation today is completely different from the past in Italy. Today, Italy, I can say, is absolutely a best practice in EU. If we consider the level of illicit today in the cigarette sector, according to the latest available data from KPMG, for 2021, showed an incidence of less than 2% compared to the EU average of 8%. Obviously, the situation in the past, if we think about 90s, was completely different. Was very similar to what we have in France today. And at that time, the south of Italy, the trafficking of illicit cigarettes from the Balkans, from North Africa, was really in the hands of organized crime that used to proceed of this business to finance also other criminal activity.
Okay, you know, the international dossiers in Brussels, which are being carried out at the moment, is there a need for a common approach and EU regulatory harmonization when it comes to raw tobacco?
Absolutely, yes. We need, it's important to have a comprehensive and really common approach, comprehensive approach, because this is something that in Europe, if I think to also Green Deal, agriculture, sometimes we have only ideological approach, and this is not the right way. Obviously, the safety, the health of the consumer is fundamental, must be a priority, but you need to consider also facts, international best practice, because we are speaking about economic aspects, social aspects, health aspects, but we need to consider together and without any kind of ideology.
Luigi Scodemario, thanks so much for joining us today. I appreciate your time.
It was a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks to Luigi. Let's back to the studio now. I'm going to ask each of our panelists if they can give us about 60 seconds or so just to give us the flavor of their key message and what they want to get across today. Juan Carlos, 60 seconds for you.
Thank you, Brian, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here in Brussels, coming from Latin America, from Colombia specifically. So I think that illicit trade is a criminal ecosystem that keeps growing. And that's why, according to OECD, it represents around $464 billion annually of the GDP global. So I think that the world is very important. But the important thing is that illicit trade is each time related with criminal international organizations, and those criminal international organizations use illicit trade as most important modus operandi to money laundering. So, for instance, in Latin America, 150 billion is the value of this illicit trade related to criminal organization. And according to OECD, again, illicit trade and criminal organized internationally cost or represents between 8 to 15% of the GDP, of the global GDP. I think that this is a serious problem.
We'll deal more with this later on as well. Thank you. Tatiana, 60 seconds.
My name is Tatiana Kostyuk. I'm a scientist from Ukraine, PhD in economics. In 2015, I defended my dissertation for the candidate degree in economics on the topic tax policy in the context of the strategy in the Ukraine, European Union integration. I am an expert on taxation in Growth Institute. My specialization is the scientific support of tax policy of Ukraine. I have 19-year experience in research in public finances, taxes, and tax policy in the European Union and Ukraine. In recent years, I actively researched the issues of excise duties on tobacco products and combating the illicit trades in the European Union and Ukraine.
Thank you. We're going to deal with those issues in a lot more detail during this discussion. Thank you, Tatiana.
Yes, yes.
Nicola, 60 seconds.
Hello everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm Nicholas. I work for Philip Morris International. It's been 19 years now, and for those past 19 years, I've been fighting illicit trade on behalf of the company around the world. Why am I here today? Illicit trade is a problem. It is a growing problem. My company says, my CEO likes to say, we're going to put cigarettes to the museum. This cannot happen if consumers, our consumers, smokers, continue, as it's happening in Europe, to switch to illicit cigarette market. That's what I'm here to talk about, find solutions together, and hope that our colleagues in the room will also relay the message to their audience. This is a very important matter to us, to the society. Thank you.
Nicholas, thank you. And also to Lukas as well, 60 seconds.
Thank you very much. I would like to stress first and foremost that illicit trade in tobacco products is an enormous problem, not only for the public finances, but also to the health policy of respective governments, because it's hugely detrimental to all the public health initiatives that are being undertaken. And to effectively combat illicit trade, we need a very good, very thoughtful combination of tax policy, which induces reductions in consumption of tobacco products, but does not create too great an incentive for the illicit trade or to counterfeit production to grow. And also, this has to be in tune with effective cooperation between the producers, the market, and the law enforcement agencies to effectively combat this issue. We have in Poland quite a unique experience in this because we are a border country of the European Union, so we are hugely exposed to inflows of illicit tobacco products from outside the European Union. Historically, we were one of the channels via which such products entered the whole common European market. But we had achieved very significant progress in this area, thanks first and foremost to the implementation of rational taxation policy, which gives the market the ability to adapt, and it gives a certainty that the regulations will change according to a certain set roadmap.
Okay, thank you. I will stay with you just a second. We spoke with Luigi about the state of play of the market, but can you tell us how you see illicit trade? What is illicit trade in the context of what we're speaking about? And is it the same picture across Europe? You speak about the example of Poland. You know, how does this sit with France, for example? So what is illicit trade?
Illicit trade comprises various kinds of activities which in effect result in illicit tobacco being present in a common market of the European Union of respective member countries. So, for instance, it is it comprises importing illicit tobacco products from outside the European Union. However, it also comprises illegal production of tobacco products, which is unfortunately a growing trend. We have an increasing amount of illicit tobacco in products, illicit cigarettes, for instance, which are being produced inside the European Union. And the picture is very differentiated among different countries. For instance, in Poland, a share of illicit tobacco products which are present in the market amounts to around 5%. Actually, currently it's a little bit lower than 5%. But for instance, in France, it amounts to around 30% of tobacco consumption. So that's a very significant problem, and it arises from different regulatory approaches which are being undertaken by different governments in the European Union. Because in Poland, while we had a very significant problem with cigarettes which were being sent across the border from Belarus, also from Ukraine in the past. Currently, it's less of a problem after COVID and other significant events which have taken place. But, however, thanks to clear regulation, which set out a roadmap to the year 2027, which indicated a gradual increase in taxation of tobacco products, which resulted in an increase in revenue from excise tax for the government, but also limited the increases in excise taxation to such a degree that it did not create excessive incentive for the black market to develop at such a scale that law enforcement agencies would be overwhelmed by it. Well, in other countries, we've seen some maximalist policies which which were created to achieve two ambitious goals in terms of the reduction in the tobacco consumption, and unfortunately they were detrimental to that ultimate goal.
Okay.
Because,
I want to drill down
this is
this a little bit.
unfortunately the example of France, they have resulted in an increase in the black market, which is not unfortunately controlled by the government.
Thank you, Lucas. We'll go back in some of that in just a moment. Nicola, let me ask you, a lot of people say cigarette market, people get cheaper cigarettes, it's a black market, it's a victimless crime, why should we care? But we're hearing about the societal impact as well. But in terms of the regulatory approach, the quality of the product, the safety of the product as well, why does this matter? Why do illicit, there's revenue loss, sure, we're going to talk more about that, but why does it matter that illicit products are removed from the market?
Look, I'll answer in two parts. The first part relates to the general issue of illicit trade. Illicit trade is nothing but financing other crimes. Illicit trade is a link to corruption, money laundering, etc. We have here a guest who knows way better than me about that. Illicit trade is, when you look at tobacco products, is something that can lead to other crimes. I'm thinking of Pablo Escobar. What is the urban legend? The urban legend has it that he started with illicit tobacco, and from there went into drug trafficking. But you can tell us more about this. So what is the problem? The problem is it is an ecosystem, of criminal organizations that see an opportunity to make profits. What does it mean for the society? It means, yes, less government revenues. I'm sure we'll get back to that. It means petty crime in the neighborhoods. It means organized crime. Yeah. But what does it mean for us as a company? Because we often ask, well, but it's good for you anyway. People smoke and it's your problem. No. What did I say as introduction? Our objective is to switch all consumers who don't quit, all smokers who don't quit, to better alternatives. If they go to the illicit trade, these are lost consumers.
What do you mean by better alternatives?
What we often reference as smoke-free products. So these are reduced risk products that are on the market, which do not combust like cigarettes. So these are products that are better alternative for smokers. This is exactly the journey I took. I used to be a smoker of cigarettes, and I switched to heated tobacco products. There are several categories to different consumer needs, tastes, behaviors. But overall, the idea is to move from a harmful product, as it is established, to less harmful products for those who don't quit. The best alternative being to quit altogether, obviously. This is why it matters for us, but it should matter for government, society. It is a matter of not just government, society, but also investments. We'll get back to that with Ukraine, for instance. But this is why I'm here, and I really want to pass that message. If we want a better world without smoking, we need to fight illicit tobacco.
Okay. Juan Carlos, the illegality and the scaling up from tobacco into other organized crime, the money laundering you mentioned earlier as well. How serious is illicit trade? Is it a minor problem, or is it an entry-level problem, or is this something which is a global network and it's systemic to a degree where you need to focus on this if you want to tackle criminality in society in general?
Yeah, as I mentioned, and I totally agree with what Nicole have said, that this is an international criminal system. For instance, just 2 weeks ago, in a small town in UK, which name is Leicestershire, in Leicestershire were seized 1.8 tons of cocaine. It comes in a sophisticated chemical methods, and the cost was around 120 million pounds. These drugs came from Panama Canal. And I want to put Panama as example because it's becoming as a strategic axis for illicit trade. And organized crime take advantage of some unintended or intended measures that don't achieve the measures or the goals that they are looking for, have a better policy. So, and I think that all of us have a role to play in tackling illicit trade and the relationship with international organized crime, and that's why the right enforcement, the right legislation framework, the right policies are very important in order to have a healthy state.
So, Tatiana, if we talk about the right policies, the right framework, and what Uka said about getting the right balance of taxation right. So, in your experience, how does taxation influence illicit trade, and in particular the tobacco market? But the illicit trade, how are you incentivizing criminal activity if you get the taxation wrong?
Thank you very much for the opportunity to present Ukrainian issues for such a high-level event. It is important to note the following about Ukraine. Since 2019, President Zelensky's government has been working to combat the illegal trade in tobacco products. In recent years, important steps have been taken to combat this practice. We observe the closure of illegal factories and the confiscation of their equipment and products, the arrest of corrupt officials. For a long time, Ukraine was the main transit country for illegal cigarettes to Europe. But in recent years, the illegal production of cigarettes for the domestic market has increased dramatically. Illegal trade in tobacco products has reached maximum level. In 2018, Ukraine introduced the 7-year plan to increase excise duty on tobacco products by 20% per year until 2025 in order to reach the minimum excise duty in force in the European Union. This became the main reason for the increase in the level of illegal cigarette trade in Ukraine from 1% in 2016 to almost percent in 2022. In particular, during the last 2 years, we have observed the greatest growth of this indicator in Ukraine. In the condition of the war in Ukraine, the deterioration of economic situation, the destruction of logistic channels, the decrease in the purchasing power of the population, and the same increase in excise duty on tobacco products prompt more and more consumers to look for cheaper alternatives offered by manufacturers of illegal production. The impact on the Ukrainian budget was obvious. In 2021, Kyiv lost more than 375 million euros in tax revenues due to the illegal trade in cigarettes. In 2022, the loss of income is estimated to reach almost €500 million. This is the income that country needs to finance the war against Ukraine. Despite the increase in the level of illegal trade in tobacco products with the beginning of Russian aggression against Ukraine and the related temporary imbalance in the activities of the control bodies, the situation remains under control, and at the end of 2022, there was some reduction of illegal cigarette market.
Let me stop you there. I want to bring in Ukas on this in particular. So we have a reduction in illegal production in one area, Ukas, but we see Belgium, for example, factories producing cigarettes in Belgium, and we see the situation in France with illicit trade monumentally larger than it is in Poland at the moment. Now, when you talk about getting the balance right for excise taxation, Ukas, what do you think the key focus should be? How do you believe you've got it right, and France seems so far off the page on this?
Yes, I believe that there is something to be learned from the experiences of Poland, because there was also a time that Poland experienced quite a significant degree of illicit trade in tobacco products. And there has been quite a significant progress over the course of last about 10 years in terms of reduction of these problems. Because in Poland, since about the year 2009, we had a significant increases in the level of tobacco taxation, excise taxation, because as this is currently in a case of Ukraine, we were trying to reach the levels of taxations which were set out in the European directive on tobacco taxation. So we are increasing levels of excise taxation in an accelerated rate. The result was that the level of illicit trade, the percentage of cigarettes which were consumed and which were from illicit sources rose from around 10% to about 18%. Between the year 2010 and
let me stop you there for a second. So let's just focus on this for a moment. So the European approach to this seems to be raise taxes so people can't afford the cigarettes, and therefore cigarette consumption would fall. Is that the premise of that overarching policy, which you tried to achieve in Poland and which led to an increase in illicit trade? Is that correct?
Broadly, yes. Of course, the taxation policy should try to reach such goals. But it's also a question of the time frame. If we are trying to achieve too much in a too short time frame, unfortunately, the side effects in terms of illicit trade outweigh all the benefits which we're trying to achieve. Because in fact, in Poland, at the time during which we were increasing tobacco taxation at a very, very high rate, the nominal revenue from excise taxation were flat. They stayed at a nominal level of about 20 billion Polish zloty in terms of both taxation of cigarette excise taxation and VAT. And the situation started to improve at the time when there was a moderation in this taxation policy.
Okay.
And in the recent years, in Poland, we have reintroduced increases in the taxation of tobacco, but according to a different time frame, and also in accordance with excise taxation roadmap. In the previous years, around the year 2010, these were discretionary decisions made by the government, which were announced to the all stakeholders in about 3 months in advance. Right now, we know exactly the level of excise taxation until the year 2027, which will exist in Poland. And
Okay.
that is a very good move because it allows all the market participants to prepare for this.
Okay, thank you, Lukas. Nicola, so we have this calendar, this fiscal calendar, which can determine the moderation of duty to be paid. It's not the only instrument in terms of dealing with illicit trade. Now, what are the other partnerships that are needed? That you must work with law enforcement, you work with the European Commission, you work with other public authorities. What works in terms of regulation that you have seen, and what doesn't work?
Look, first point, I think what Lukas just mentioned is absolutely fundamental. Poland has gone through excessive tax increases, realized the negative impact in terms of illicit trade. The tax collections were flat despite the tax increase. Then realizing that, changed the approach. What is the result? They went from 10% 4 years ago, of illicit consumption down to 4.9% last year. And big suspense, tomorrow you'll have the 2022 KPMG results, and be on the watch because you'll see Poland is doing well once again. What does it show? It shows reasonable policies from a fiscal standpoint. But you're absolutely right to say that we need to work all together to fight illicit. Look at counterfeit. We're talking a doubling of counterfeit in 2 years in France. Doubling, twice more. Where are we here? Brussels. Last week, I'm gonna try to hide the brand. This pack was found by law enforcement in a factory, underground factory, less than 1 hour from here, driving up north to Emvert. Look at this, Tatiana. This is a very good looking product, but a very deceiving product as well, because clearly substandard. How do you fight against that? You need those partnerships. You need law enforcement to have a legislative tool that helps them to enforce. You need the strict penalties from the Justice Department, and you need the private sector, in that case here for that product, the tobacco industry, to bring their expertise. We send out technicians to help law enforcement assess the volumes produced and therefore the damage caused to government revenues. This is how then the courts estimate the penalty. The higher the damage, because we're able to estimate it for law enforcement, the higher the penalty, the higher the deterrence. The higher the deterrence, the less criminality you'll have. This factory where this pack was counterfeited is just a second one this year. 2 months ago, you had another one, less than an hour and a half drive from here. From here, the center of Europe, where regulations are made.
Okay. Well, Carlos, what incentivizes a shift to production in a country? You know, Belgium probably didn't have this number of illegal factories, literally underground factories producing cigarettes. Why now? Why do they start to do this? Is it just a logistics hub? Is this supply chains? Why do people do this and start up a factory?
No, I think that behind of this, there are a mafia, organized crime, that they use and manipulate all those supply chain in order to get benefits, profits. That's why illicit trade is, as you mentioned at the very beginning, is neither petty nor victimless. It's a high profit and low risk crime. So that's why we all together have to tackle this problem. And the other factor, I think that first is because there is a mafia and organized crime between that are threatening our national and international security. So this is a real issue that we have to recognize. Second, I think that governments must be acknowledge that the problem exists. And we see, for instance, some countries in Latin America, and I use as example, again, Panama, because Panama is the half of the problem. Maybe around 8 billion illegal cigarettes coming from Asia, especially, most specifically from China, South Korea, and India, go through Panama to the surrounding countries. And those organizations or those illicit trade are on handles of international organizations, criminals.
Why Panama?
Yeah, because I think that there are different factors. First, some officers there believe that illicit trade is not their problem. Second, there is a lack of capacity in order to tackle this problem. Third, regulation. I think that the regulation, intended or unintended measure, don't have the intention of the results that the government is looking for, have a better situation. And third, I think that corruption exists, and also there are other factors like Cologne free trade zone, because there are a lot of movements of goods without control there. And because this is also the strategic axis I mentioned at the very beginning, between Caribbean and Atlantic, north and south of the continent, that criminal organizations take advantage of this.
Thank you. We're going to take some questions now. We'll start with Slido, and then we'll see if anybody else in the room wants to participate. Also, just to note that the full version of the video, you can see the YouTube link there on Slido as well. A question from Sadat: where would we locate plastic waste trade in illicit trade? Thousands of tons of dirty plastic waste exports from EU to UK to Turkey and other low-income countries, even intra-EU. I'm not sure any of our panel will want to take that, but we'll put that there for the moment. And then Eduardo from Catalonia, El Periódico Catalunya, says, I would like to know, what is the situation of the legal tobacco trade in Spain? Is the fall that began last year confirmed this year? Maybe we find out tomorrow. And what are the causes of this evolution? What is Gibraltar's role? And what about the French situation? France, we're going to talk about a little bit more. Nicola, can I give you this question? So the situation in Spain, is the fall that began last year been confirmed this year? And what are the causes of this change in direction for Spain?
Okay, I think Spain is one of the examples where law enforcement and the private sector, Philip Morris included, work well together to address illicit. There's been 18 counterfeit factories raided in the past year or so in Spain. That is staggering. I think 18 counterfeiting factories. I think somebody said this morning it is the most smuggled products. It is highly counterfeited too. Do you know how many factories were raided by law enforcement last year in Europe? 134 illicit factories, counterfeit cigarettes, raided in 18 European countries. When I started 19 years ago, 90+% was coming from China. It has become a made in the EU problem. And I think Spain, and you'll see tomorrow, I can say it now, results are confirmed because there's no reason why a good cooperation, partnership with law enforcement cannot yield results. And I want to thank also colleagues such as Lucas for all the work they've been doing in Poland. In Poland, every year, over 60 counterfeiting factories that make illicit cigarettes, counterfeit cigarettes, not just for Poland, but for the whole Europe,
Okay.
are raided by law enforcement. We have cooperation agreements and a partnership that works extremely well. And this is the way to go with a complement of a proper fiscal calendar, fiscal policy, as well as a more innovative policy that also gives access to affordable, better alternatives, because that's also why things are working well in Poland.
We're focusing on tobacco, but I think Luigi was clear that it's other agricultural products as well, which are counterfeit or presenting themselves in a way that they shouldn't. Juan Carlos, the question from Silvana, and she asks, how can we seriously fight illicit trade if there's no common agreed qualification of what is illicit in every trading operations, including the type of products, their payment modalities, and other involved actions and relations? So if we take the broader view of not just tobacco, but other products as well, do we have a uniform approach, a singular approach to describing what the problem is? And is illicit trade in one country perceived differently from another country? Is this part of the problem in terms of getting harmonization and good regulation and good law enforcement?
No, I think that there is not a common point of view or approach of different governments in order to tackle the problem. And we have this problem in Latin America and the Caribbean countries, and I see also a problem in Europe, for instance, because we have unilateral decisions that affect the borders, affect other countries, the neighbor countries, or is an advantage for neighbor countries, but also because there are some measures that indirectly are funding the organized crime. And here I see, for instance, in France, in Ukraine, and in Belgium, that we have that problem. And in Latin America and the Caribbean, from my experience and knowledge, during 33 years working from the intelligence and criminal investigations field, and now from the private sector, we have had a lot of efforts with authorities in order to have a common approach. And we see some good intentions, but you face problems related like the lack of right regulations. For instance, it's very difficult to standardize regulations among different governments. Second, corruption, as I mentioned before. Governments don't take decisions sometimes in Latin America, in some countries, not all of them, but in some countries. Third, taxation. Taxation is not only about intellectual property or tax evasion. I think that, for instance, a country like Ecuador, the high taxes incentive organized crime, illicit trade, as tobacco, specifically, for instance. It is happening there. Finally, I think that it's very important to support the authorities, especially the law enforcement, with intelligence, with criminal investigation, in order to, as Nicole mentioned before, to follow the money, the illegal money, and to seize the assets of those structures that are related with illicit trade, and because they go to the criminal circle in order to continue with this criminal economic system.
Just a quick question. What's the difference between Europe and Latin America on this? Are we facing exactly the same problems, or is there a cultural or legal difference?
No, I think that there is a specific point related to cocaine and terrorist groups. Today, we are producing in Latin America 2.3 thousand tons of cocaine annually. I just mentioned an example that happened here in UK. That was the first case in the history in UK. So the world produced 7.4 thousand tons of heroin. And also we have fentanyl, we have synthetic drugs, etc. All those drugs needs to be monetized. So they need the money. And what we have seen from Latin America and the Caribbean is that they sell drugs around the world, but the money go to China or Asia or other countries I mentioned before to get contraband illicit products like tobacco, like pharmaceutical, electronics, or technological, and they bring those products to Latin America and the Caribbean, Mexico, for instance, Guatemala, Panama, especially, and other countries in the Caribbean in order to get the money, to get the profits.
So there's an illegality twice. So they're dealing in the drugs, laundering the money through China or some other country, bringing in contraband products, counterfeit products into the European markets and selling those as illicit products. So it's not just a loss of income, it's a full money laundering operation.
Exactly.
Okay.
The problem is that the fragility of the public institutions and other authorities, and as mentioned before, just to finish, that some institutions, some officials think that the problem doesn't exist.
Okay.
They don't acknowledge that.
So it's not a joined-up thinking.
Exactly.
Okay. I want to come back and talk about Ukraine in just a moment, but Lucas, let's focus a little bit on France for the moment. You know, it does seem that France is behind the curve when it comes to solving this problem. You know, the evidence seems pretty clear that France doesn't have the balance right here. Why does France, in your opinion, persist with this level of taxation when it doesn't deliver the results that they would want to see in terms of revenue nor public health?
Well, I believe they were trying to achieve maximalist goals of reducing the consumption of tobacco products. Well, however, this policy seems to have backfired. So I believe that in face of this new evidence that is arising from year after year from the reports on illicit
this is my point, is that
trade and
it's year after
production.
year the evidence is there, but France doesn't change its policy. Why not?
Well, I believe it's sometimes it's very difficult to change the course of a given policy, given the fact that there's also a very strong trend towards the so-called policy maximalism in terms of accepting no compromises, in terms of trying to achieve certain goals in terms of health policy. But however, I believe that countries, member countries of the EU, should take a more balanced approach based on evidence-based policy, not based on what their imperatives are in terms of the end goal they're trying to achieve.
So basically, we have a situation
can be achieved.
Okay, so basically we have a situation where it seems that the French ideology of maximalism is driving this agenda. They're not adjusting this policy for ideological reasons, despite the evidence base that's there. What will it take to convince France that none of their objectives for public policy or for public revenue are being met by ideology, that they need to shift to a data-driven approach? Lucas?
I believe it will just have to take a little more time. I believe that given the fact that such trends persist, so that the level of illicit tobacco trade in France stays at the level that it currently is, or even the problem escalates, and also the examples of other countries become more and more evident over time, I believe that it can eventually change the status quo. But I believe that in terms of creating certain policies, the status quo sometimes is very persistent, even if the facts suggest that alternative course of policy would be in the end more beneficial. But in certain sometimes for policymakers, like all they have in mind is the end game, so the total reduction in consumption of tobacco products. But I believe actually that's what everyone has in mind. But in terms of the measures which have to be taken to actually bring this future about.
Okay. I say to our audience, if you can put the questions on Slido, I will put those to the panel as well. We don't have the microphone to bring it. So if you can put it, we don't have the microphone to pick up for the audio, for the video. So if you just put it on Slido for me, and I'll bring it to the audience as well. Tatiana, let's talk about Ukraine for a second in the context of what we heard. Has Ukraine taken an ideological approach to this in terms of maximalism, or are you adjusting your policy and learning as you go?
The breaking of the negative trend became possible due to the measures taken, including the highest political level. Zelensky administration forced law enforcement agencies to reveal the up to 10 places where cigarettes intended for domestic and international markets were illegally produced. These were well-equipped enterprises with fairly modern equipment. When making a decision to increase the excise duty on tobacco products, Ukraine can take into account the European Union experience. Moderate excise policy is an effective tool to combat production and illegal production and turnover of tobacco products. Also, increase institutional capacity of control bodies. We can be effective only it is complement, does not replace a reasonable rise in the excise duty on tobacco products. Combating the illegal production of and turnover of tobacco products is a complex problem, the solution of which requires a systemic approach, a coordinated response of the state, businesses and civil society. It is necessary to consider the best experience of the European Union countries in this area, take into account the measures that allowed these countries to reduce the share of the illegal cigarette market and increase budget revenues.
Thank you. Just a reminder for our studio audience as well, the hashtag for Slido is, there we go, illicit trade, hashtag illicit trade. And if you can scan the QR code, if you can see it online as well, send us your questions now. We have about 20 minutes left, so you need to get those questions to us as quickly as possible. Nicola, and then come to Juan Carlos. So the societal impact here as well, the quick narrative would be poor people smoke and they waste their money on cigarettes. Educated people seem to quit smoking more easily. But this is not a product of with elasticity in terms of the nicotine addiction drives a compulsive purchase, which doesn't exist for other products, for example. So what I'm asking is, in a very simple way, are the poorest in society being penalized by higher taxation because they're addicted to nicotine?
A simple answer is yes. Let me give you a few, maybe a few numbers. Well, because you use the term societal, and societal means people. And here I want to talk about the smokers, because that's who we're talking about. In France, well, let me start with Panama. Panama, did you know that 9 smokers out of 10, are smoking illicit in Panama? Illicit cigarettes? 9 smokers out of 10. Why does it matter? Because those 9 smokers are locked into illicit channels. In those illicit channels, they find themselves completely away, locked away from innovative products, new products, etc. This is exactly the same that is happening in France, my country. Yeah, I'm a little bit concerned about my country. Did you know, fun fact, or not fun at all actually, you know that we lost the World Cup.
You're not going to get with
Everybody knows, yeah.
That.
But we are still world champion in terms of counterfeit cigarette consumption. Hurrah! Yeah? What does it mean in France? It means that those who are locked into the illicit tobacco, illicit cigarette channels are actually completely locked away. You're creating a separate...
Explain what you mean by locked into, because it would seem that consumers have choice. So why are these particular people locked into a channel?
Well, if you buy illicit cigarettes in France, you go to Paris, you go to a street corner, what is the street seller selling you? He's selling you counterfeit cigarettes, illicit cigarettes. Is he having an alternative? If you go to a legitimate tobacconist in Paris, you will see those different products. And if you ask the tobacconist could guide you through different, better alternatives, from vaping to heated tobacco, and or maybe pouches in some countries, nicotine pouches in countries where they're commercialized. This is not happening if you buy your illicit cigarettes from the street. So what are you doing here? We're doing exactly what you're suggesting in your question, which is smoking in general is higher in terms of incidence in the lower economic classes. Yes, absolutely true. Now, with the purchasing power pressure, the price increase, what's happening is they shift into illicit, cheaper products. They look for cheaper products, counterfeit, like this one. Yeah, again, like this one, made underground. And what happens is they're not informed, meaning they're not aware, they don't have access to those products that would be so much better for them. So you create a whole segment of consumers of the population that are smokers of illicit. It's almost 3 out of 10 in France, Brian.
The idea that this
3 out of 10 smokers are lost.
Sure, but the idea that a lot of people take issue with the phrase "so much better for them." So clarify what you mean by "so much better for them."
So what I mean is cigarettes are harmful. We all know that.
Why?
Because of the combustion and everything that comes out of the smoke. If you're interested into more details, which I'm unable to provide because I work on anti-illicit trade issues, but you go to our website, you will have access to all the science that demonstrate how combustion, which is the mechanics of ingesting nicotine from a cigarette, you don't have that in, for example, heated tobacco products. The tobacco is heated, and therefore the toxicity is much lower. Again, I invite everyone to go and take a look at the science.
But basically what you're saying is, while the merits of vaping and other heated tobacco products can be debated, you're basically saying they're less dangerous than cigarettes.
They're potentially much less harmful, which means what? These are better alternatives, you know what I'm saying?
Okay, now, but the price point of that is, taxation is the same for these products, for the less dangerous products compared with traditional cigarettes. So the taxation, there's no incentive for the seller to bring.
So this is exactly what we mean by an innovative set of policies, including for fiscal, where you have a fiscal policy or fiscal level that is proportionate to the risk associated.
Okay, so you need public education plus a financial incentive to make this shift for the broader population rather than the...
And as far as I'm concerned, you also need to tackle illicit. So stiff penalties and robust law enforcement. This is a combination that has demonstrated to be working in Poland, for example.
Okay. Thank you. We have a question from my colleague here, Euractiv, Sarantis. And Sarantis asks, what is the exact economic impact, the amount annually, of tax losses due to illicit tobacco made since the beginning of the war in Ukraine? That's the first question. The second was, has PMI calculated the exact impact of illicit tobacco trade on the rollout of novel tobacco products in Europe? Nicola?
I think you'll have to repeat the question.
Okay, let's go to the first one. So, do you know the exact economic impact, the amount annually of tax losses due to illicit tobacco trade since the beginning of the Ukrainian war? Tatiana, maybe?
Yes, I can answer this question. The impact of the Ukrainian budget was obvious. In 2021, Kyiv lost more than 375 million euros in tax revenue due to the illegal trade in cigarettes in 20.
This was just Ukraine lost this, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so
Just Ukraine.
the impact across Europe since then would be significantly larger.
Yes, I don't know
Okay.
what was the loss in the whole Europe.
Maybe a quick comment
Sure.
on this as a complement. So 600 million government revenue losses in Ukraine, in the last year-ish. So that coincides more or less. Yeah. What maybe we also want to keep in mind is the other illicit trade phenomenon. If you look at what we call illicit white, so it's a category of illicit cigarettes, you have a number of brands that are typically originating in Ukraine that are also impacting European markets. And I think as much as the Ukraine domestic market is suffering from illicit tobacco, there are also brands that are impacting illicit trade in the rest of Europe.
Okay.
And we should pay attention to that as well, because that is clearly a threat.
Okay, thank you. Another question. Lukas, you want to take a go at this first, and it brings the rest of the panel. From Julian. And Julian asks, the rise in illicit trade is connected to Europe's economic crisis brought about by the pandemic and the war in Ukraine. Is the higher inflation and consequently higher cost of living changing consumers' behaviors and enabling counterfeiters to make more products bring more products to the market?
Well, naturally, weaker economic conditions, which are also coincide with higher rates of inflation, reduce the real purchasing power of consumers. So, depending on the excise the taxation policy of given countries, it can provide some, unfortunately, boost to illicit trade and production, because some of the consumers are more in a greater degree inclined towards consuming such illegal products. But as is also the case with our discussion in terms of the burden which is being proportionately to a greater degree borne by those people which are in the lower, which achieve lower levels of income.
Okay.
Also, policy which allows a lower level of taxation for products which come with lower degree of risk also create a channel which allows the consumers to move not only which create a situation in which the illicit products are not their only alternative. They can also turn towards less harmful cigarette alternatives to cigarettes in order to also achieve savings, in order to save money, to reduce their spending on tobacco products or tobacco alternatives in more challenging economic conditions.
Okay, let me stop you there for a second. I'll come back to you in just a second. We want to bring this to Nicola as well. On novel tobacco products, Sarantis was asking, you may not know the exact figure on this, but basically, how does the illicit trade function with novel products, the new products for tobacco, compared with traditional cigarettes?
That is a very good question. Thank you. First of all, the scale, the magnitude is vastly different. As much as for cigarettes, it is huge and keeps on growing. For novel products, or what we call smoke-free products, the illicit trade is still at the beginning, the minimum level. The key question is, what is going to be the regulatory fiscal framework around these, and make sure that illicit trade does not grow for these categories. What I'm trying to say is, let's not make the same mistake as with novel products, as has been done with cigarettes, particularly in a number of European countries, such as my lovely country, France.
Okay, Juan Carlos, do you see when you look at Europe that the illicit trade, one of our the questions here is from Evaldas, is the illicit trade moving from the east to the west of Europe? Is there a new pattern emerging here?
Yeah, I think I just come from Istanbul 3-4 weeks ago, and we were there participating in a EMEA conference, and we see that, for instance, in Turkish has an important problem in this illicit trade. It's almost very similar than Panama. Panama and Turkish are a strategic axis, and the play role on the problem is almost the same. And I think that independent that it's from east to west, the problem move around the world.
Okay.
No in a horizontal way, also a vertical way. This is 30,
Well,
sixty
when you look
grades.
at global crime patterns, movement of drugs, the markets for other illegal products, illegal substances or other products, generally is crime moving geographically, or are these well-established patterns and they're just investing in new markets?
No, it moves geographically, of course, but there are problems like we have mentioned here.
Yeah.
The policies, enforcement, and other measures that corruptions, the fragility of some institutions that incentivize the problem. But just a specific situation in the South Pacific Sea and the Caribbean, in Latin America and the Caribbean countries, we see that violence, criminality are increasing. Homicides in the port, maritime cities.
We see this here in Belgium as well, Port of Antwerp in particular.
Exactly, because they are fighting to have under control the illicit trade and the drugs trafficking and et cetera, et cetera. So
do you think this goes to Nicolas' point about why there's at least more discovery of factories here in Belgium, for example? Maybe they always existed and nobody did anything about them, but now because we see a rise in violent crime associated with drug trafficking, but also counterfeit products, that the police force takes this more seriously now. Has there been a change in police attitude in Europe?
No, I think that, yeah, I have the opportunity to be in Europol, working with Europol, Interpol, and Ameripol, and they are doing a lot of efforts in order to run international operation, joint operation. We do each year a lot of operation between a joint operation with Europol, with Interpol, and with Ameripol, tackling illicit products at the same time in Europe and in South America.
Okay.
And the difference that I've seen when we are running at the same time international operation in order to tackle illicit products as tobacco, for instance, alcohol, pharmaceutical, and electronics, is that in South America and in the Caribbean countries, there is a big lack of capability. In different dimensions.
Okay.
Justice, intelligence, investigation, technology, innovation, knowledge, and other resources that we need, or those countries need, in order to be more efficient tackling this problem. And in Europe, like in Latin America and the Caribbean, I think that corruption also are in the mirror.
All right.
And that's why we need to be more transparent and more openly in order to acknowledge that the problem exists and that we have to take each time more effective measures in order to tackle the problem.
Thank you. Let me stop you there. We're going to come to the close of the program. I want to ask each of our panelists for 30-second soundbite to wrap up with. Lucas, let's start with you. Your takeaway from today, what's your key message?
Well, my key message would be that we should conduct policy in regards to tobacco illicit trade. First of all, based upon what actually works, not just wishful thinking, but conduct our policy based on evidence. And we know that what works is balanced, gradual increase in taxation of traditional tobacco products, and also introducing of the taxation based on harm, more tax, less harm, less tax. And also what is crucial is the cooperation between the market participants and the law enforcement agencies, and strict enforcement of the regulations, implementation of new regulations in terms of combating illicit trade, in terms of border controls, and also shutting down illegal cigarette factories.
Thank you. Tatiana.
I will be shortly. When we make a decision to increase the excise duty on tobacco products, Ukraine can take into account negative precedent in the European Union and the experience of more successful neighbors. We should also do some actions to combat the illegal trade in tobacco products in Ukraine. There are some actions that we should do at the administrative level: cooperation with European Union member states, inspection of civil services, control of customs and border, strengthening the police, information campaigns, and other measures.
Thank you so much. Nicola.
Thank you everyone for this great discussion. In terms of takeaway, my company, my CEO, wants to end cigarettes. We can only do that if we end illicit tobacco. I think from a general approach, what Lucas mentioned is stiff penalties and robust law enforcement. That curbs the supply. We need to address the demand with consumers. They need to be aware of the negative consequences of counterfeit cigarettes and illicit in general. And as Lucas said, let's work together, industry, government, regulators, and all of you here in the room, to make sure that we push for balanced regulations, be they fiscal, be there regulatory frameworks that incentivize, in general, for those who don't quit smoking to switch to better alternatives.
Thank you. 30 seconds, Juan Carlos.
I think that illicit trade is a criminal ecosystem, and OLAF has to take a role in order to tackle this issue. It's part of the international organized crime, and is feeding of illicit trade, this organized crime. And I think that the right policies, the right regulatory frameworks, the right enforcements are needed in order to have a healthy state. And finally, I think that as we did the work together in the 80s against drugs trafficking, at the very beginning of the century against organized crime with Palermo Convention and corruption, now maybe we need a convention in order to tackle illicit trade.
Okay.
So we need to acknowledge that the problem exists and that it's threatening the national and international security.
Thank you. It's clear Europe can't afford to be addicted to ideology and bad policy, but it's got to follow the data. Our thanks to our panel today for all the excellent insight and the expertise that we have seen. Thanks also to our audience who have sent us and been really engaged with questions today, and also for the Euractiv team who you don't see, but they put all this together. So to Zoran, Bonya, Tamara, and the rest of the events team as well, and also to Philip Morris International for the support for the program today. Wish you a good afternoon. I'm Brian Maguire.